There comes a moment when everything grows quiet, not in the world outside, but somewhere deep within. A moment when even your own thoughts begin to slow down, as if they too are tired of trying. You sit with yourself, and there is nothing left to say, not because there are no words, but because the words no longer feel like they belong to you. He had reached that place without even realizing when it began. At first, it was small, a few moments of being unheard, a few times when he spoke, and they looked past him as if his voice carried no weight. He told himself it was nothing, just passing moments, just something that would fade. But it didn't fade. It stayed, quietly, gently, like a shadow that does not leave when the light returns. And slowly, something inside him began to change. Not loudly, not all at once, but in a way that made everything feel distant. The laughter around him no longer reached him the same way. The conversations felt like noise, moving around him, but never touching him. Even his own words began to feel heavy, as if speaking required more effort than it once did. Have you ever felt that kind of silence? Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that slowly takes something from you. He began to notice it more in the quiet moments, when there was nothing to distract him, when he was left alone with the weight of things he could not explain. There were thoughts he wanted to share, feelings he wanted to express, but something held him back, a quiet hesitation, a feeling that maybe it would not matter anyway. And so he said less, not out of choice, at least not at first. It was more like something inside him had decided before he could. Words would rise, but they would not leave. They would stay there, unspoken, fading, before they were ever heard. They continued as they always did, speaking loudly, moving quickly, filling every space with their presence. And in that noise, his silence became invisible, almost as if it had no place among them. Did they notice? Or did his silence simply make things easier for them? There is a strange kind of loneliness that comes when you are surrounded by voices, yet feel unseen. It does not shout. It does not demand attention. It simply sits with you, quietly reminding you of what is missing. He tried in small ways to reach out. A word here, a thought there. But each time, it felt like placing something fragile into hands that did not know how to hold it. And so, he began to pull back even more. Not in anger, not in bitterness, just in quiet acceptance. It is a difficult thing to feel yourself fading in places where you once felt present, to notice that your absence would not change much, that whether you spoke or stayed silent, the world around you would move in the same way. And in that realization, something inside him grew still. He stopped expecting to be understood, stopped waiting for someone to notice the quiet shift within him. The effort that once lived in his voice slowly dissolved into something softer, something almost invisible. But deep within that silence, there was still something left. Not loud, not clear, but present. A quiet awareness that he could not yet name. As if the silence itself was holding something, waiting for him to see it, or perhaps waiting for him to stop looking outside and finally listen to what remained within. The quiet did not leave him after that. It stayed, but it changed its shape. At first, it had felt heavy, almost like something pressing against his chest, but now it became something he could sit with, something that no longer chased him, but waited for him. He began to notice how often they spoke without truly seeing. Their words filled the air, but they did not always carry meaning. Sometimes it felt like they spoke just to avoid the very silence he had come to know so well. And in those moments, he wondered, was his silence really the emptiness he once feared, or was it something they could not face? There is a difference between being quiet and being still. He had been quiet before, but now he was beginning to understand stillness, a kind of calm that does not depend on what is happening around you. A place where you do not feel the need to reach out, not because you have given up, but because you are beginning to see things clearly. They continued to misunderstand him. Some thought he had nothing to say. Others believed he had grown distant. A few may have even thought he was weak. But he no longer felt the same urge to correct them. Why? Because for the first time, he began to see that not every misunderstanding needs an answer. He watched how quickly they reacted to small things. A word, a glance, a tone, and suddenly everything would shift. Voices would rise. Emotions would spill over. And in the middle of it all, something would always be lost. Something quiet and important, buried beneath the noise. He had once been part of that. He remembered how it felt to react without thinking, to defend, to explain, to prove. It felt necessary back then, almost like a way to protect something inside. But now, as he sat in his silence, he began to see that those reactions had often taken more from him than they ever gave. They drained him, not all at once, but little by little. Each moment of reacting, each need to be understood, each attempt to be seen, it all carried a cost he had never noticed before. And now, he could see it clearly. Silence, in its own quiet way, was showing him something he had missed. That not every moment deserves his energy. That not every voice deserves his response. That sometimes the strongest thing he could do was nothing at all. This realization did not come like a sudden light. It arrived slowly like the soft change from night into early morning, barely noticeable at first, but undeniable once it had fully arrived. He began to feel less pulled by what they said. Their words no longer reached him in the same way. Not because he had built walls, but because he had built walls, but because he had found a place within himself that felt steady. Have you ever noticed how silence can reveal what noise tries to hide? In the absence of constant reaction, he began to see things as they were, not as they appeared in the heat of the moment, but as they truly existed beneath it. And in that clarity, something inside him grew stronger. Not louder, just stronger. He no longer felt the same need to explain himself, the same urgency to be understood. There was a quiet confidence beginning to form, one that did not depend on their approval or their attention. And yet, he did not feel distant. He simply felt centered. as if he had stepped back just enough to see the whole picture, instead of being lost inside it. They continued as they always had, speaking, reacting, moving quickly, from one moment to the next. But he was no longer moving with them in the same way. He had slowed down, and in that slowing down, he had found something they could not see. A quiet space that belonged only to him. A space where he did not have to prove anything. A space where silence was no longer a burden, but the beginning of understanding. At first, he did not fully trust this new feeling. It was unfamiliar, almost too gentle to believe. For so long, he had measured himself through their reactions, through what they said, how they responded, whether they understood. And now, without those things guiding him, there was a strange uncertainty. He would sit in silence and ask himself, is this strength, or is this simply distance? The question stayed with him. There were moments when their words still reached him, not as deeply as before, but enough to stir something inside, a brief urge to respond, to explain, to correct what they had misunderstood. It would rise quickly, like a spark, and then fade just as quietly. And each time it faded, he noticed something important. Nothing was lost. The moment passed. The noise settled, and the world continued, just as it always did. But this time, he had not given anything away. Not his energy, not his peace, not the quiet center he was beginning to protect. This was new. Before, every reaction had felt necessary, as if silence would cost him something, as if not speaking meant losing his place. But now he was beginning to see that reacting had been the thing that cost him the most. Have you ever given so much of yourself only to feel emptier afterward? He had, and now, for the first time, he was doing the opposite. He was holding back, not out of fear, but out of awareness. A quiet understanding that not everything deserved a piece of him. They did not notice the change in the way he expected. There was no sudden recognition, no moment where they paused and said, something is different. To them, he was still the same quiet presence, perhaps even quieter than before, easy to overlook, easy to misunderstand. But something within him had shifted in a way that did not need to be seen. He began to feel a quiet kind of respect, not from them, but from within himself. A subtle sense of steadiness that grew each time he chose not to react. Each time he allowed a moment to pass without stepping into it. It was not about being silent all the time. It was about choosing when to speak and when to remain still. And in that choice, he found something he had been searching for without knowing. Control, not over them, not over what they said or did, but over himself. This control did not feel heavy. It did not feel like something he had to force. It felt natural, like something that had always been there, waiting for him to notice it. He started to see that silence was not empty at all. It was full of awareness, full of observation, full of quiet strength that did not need to announce itself. While they moved quickly, reacting to every small shift, he remained steady, Not disconnected, just no longer pulled in every direction. And slowly, that steadiness became something deeper. Peace. Not the kind that depends on everything being calm around you, but the kind that stays, even when things are unclear, even when you are misunderstood, even when nothing changes on the outside. Because something has already changed within. He no longer felt the same need to be seen, not because he believed he had no value, but because he had begun to feel it without needing it reflected back. And that made his silence different. It was no longer a place of hiding. It was a place of quiet strength. A place where he could stand without speaking and still feel whole. A place where he could let them be as they are without losing himself in the process. And in that stillness, without any announcement, without any outward sign, everything had already begun to change. There was no moment where everything suddenly became clear. No single turning point. That marked the change. It happened quietly, almost unnoticed, like a gentle shift in the air before the dawn. But one day, he realized something had settled within him. The same voices were there, the same patterns, the same reactions, the same misunderstandings. Nothing around him had truly changed. They still spoke as Saf, I always did. They still assumed, still filled the silence without ever really seeing it, and yet it no longer touched him in the same way. He listened, but he was no longer pulled. He observed, but he did not feel the need to step in. Their words would pass through the moment, but they no longer stayed within him. It was as if he had learned to stand just a little apart. Not in distance, but in awareness. Have you ever noticed how some things only have power when you hold on to them? He had been holding on to so much. Every word, every reaction, every small moment that once felt important. He carried them, even when they had already passed, and in doing so, he gave them a weight they were never meant to have. Now he was letting them go, not forcefully, not as a practice or a rule, simply by not holding on. A word would come, and it would pass. A moment would rise, and it would fade. And he remained steady, in a way he had never known before. There was a quiet freedom in that, the kind that does not need to be expressed or explained, the kind that cannot be taken because it does not depend on anything outside of you. They still misunderstood him, but their misunderstanding no longer felt like something he needed to fix. It became just another passing thing, like a cloud moving across the sky. Present for a moment, and then gone. And in that, he found something deeper than being understood. He found peace with not being understood. That was the part they would never see, because from the outside, nothing looked different. There were no loud changes, no visible signs, just a man who spoke less, who reacted less, who seemed to exist quietly in the spaces others filled with noise. But within that quiet, there was strength, not the kind that proves itself, the kind that no longer needs to. He no longer felt the need to defend his silence. It had Beck. I'm a part of him, as natural as breathing. Not something he used, but something he lived within. And in that space, he began to understand something that cannot be taught with words. That silence is not the absence of power. It is the presence of it. A presence that does not push, does not demand, does not compete. It simply remains steady, unshaken, whole. He had once thought that having nothing left meant losing everything. But now he could see it differently. When there is nothing left to prove, nothing left to protect, nothing left to chase, what remains is something quiet and unbreakable, something that cannot be taken because it was never given away. And so he stayed as he was, not withdrawn, not distant, just still. While the world moved, as it always had, he remained grounded within himself, no longer shaped by every passing moment, no longer carried by every voice. And in that stillness, without needing to say a single word, he had already changed everything.